Hello, this is CL Barber looking at crime and punishment. Today we're going to be looking at Whitechapel and a brief introduction. Hopefully, by the end of this presentation, you should be able to know where Whitechapel is, know why Whitechapel was famous, and to understand the sorts of things you'll need to know for the GCSE questions. So Whitechapel was a district in the East End of London, and you can see it here on the map in red. So, at the time, Whitechapel was well known. It was well known for its beggars, its prostitution, the alcoholism, criminality, the widespread unemployment after the 1873 depression, and it was a time when poor people were considered bad, when people just wanted a day's work in order to be able to put a loaf of bread on the table. It was a time when prostitution was a necessity and not a choice, and where workhouses were a last resort. It was a place where lawlessness had become a part of ordinary life. Today, however, Whitechapel is famous because of Jack the Ripper. The conditions that we've just outlined enabled Jack the Ripper to brutally murder women at night, and he remains uncaught. He highlights all that was wrong with Whitechapel's conditions at the time. So, crime and punishment consists of two parts of the exam. The first part is on the depth study, whereas the second part is on the crime and punishment from 1000 to present day. So question 1 is based on Whitechapel, and it's an explain two features question, and it's worth 4 marks. You need to make sure that you explain 2 points. So you get your first point in each section for talking about a feature, and the second point for expanding on it. You need to do this twice to get your 4 marks. So, if I were asked for 2 features on life in a workhouse, I would state one feature of a workhouse was that all the residents were required to wear a uniform. That would be my first point. As a result of this, it made them stand out and meant they felt humiliated. That would be my second point. I then need to talk about something different. So I could say another feature of the workhouse was the tough living conditions residents faced. That would be my first point. This can be shown by the tough manual labour that they were expected to undertake, the fact that families were split up and that people could be punished for even trying to talk to each other would make up the second point for that paragraph. Question 2a is worth 8 marks and it's a source utility question. So an example would be, how useful are sources A and B for an inquiry into? You will then be given a topic which could be anything from the depth study, such as workhouses, housing, immigration, the police, etc. The focus of this question is to analyse and evaluate how useful each of the 2 sources are. So what you will need to do for each source is you need to make sure that you provide an overall judgment, but you do not need to compare the sources. When you're making this judgment, you need to make it clear what criteria you're using. The first part you would do is make sure that you talk about provenance. For that, you need to include the nature or the type of source and the impact of its usefulness. The origin, for example, who wrote it, when, where, and the impact again on the usefulness of the source. And lastly, you talk about the purpose of the source and how that would influence the usefulness of the source. You would also need to make sure that you make a judgment on the content. This would include the message, the language, and your contextual knowledge. So, what does the source tell us? Is it factual or vague? Is it formal or informal, written or a picture? Does it fit in with what your contextual knowledge of the period is? What does it tell you and what does it leave out? Once you've done this, you need to make an overall judgment. You then repeat this process for the second source. The last question is question 2b, and this has 4 separate 1-point questions which is about interrogating a source. The first thing you'll be asked to do is to follow up a source on a particular subject. So again, it could be immigration, the police, or housing. You will then have to pick out a detail that you want to explore further. Once you have done this, you have to state a question that you would ask. Once you've got your question, you then need to identify a source, usually a primary source, that you could use to find out this information. And lastly, for the 4th mark, you need to say what you think that source would tell you that would enable you to answer that question. The rest of the questions on the paper relate to crime and punishment from 1000 to present day. This is C.L. Barber, 1977. Thank you for listening and for watching.